In the summer of 1943, the fate of the Eastern Front hung over a vast stretch of land in western Russia, where forests, rivers, wheat fields, and small villages formed a giant bulge in the German front line. This bulge, centered on the city of Kursk, would soon become the stage for the greatest land battle in human history. What unfolded there was not merely a clash of armies, but a collision of industrial empires, ideologies, and wills, a struggle in which millions of men and tens of thousands of machines would be hurled against each other in a contest that would decide the future of the Second World War. After the catastrophic German defeat at Stalingrad in the winter of 1942 to 1943, the strategic situation on the Eastern Front had changed dramatically. For the first time, the Red Army had destroyed an entire German field army. The myth of German invincibility had been shattered. Yet the Wehrmacht was far from defeated. In the spring of 1943, German forces still held vast territories from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. They still possessed experienced commanders, elite divisions, and powerful armored formations. Adolf Hitler believed that one decisive blow could restore German dominance in the East. The front line after the winter battles formed a massive salient around Kursk, jutting westward into German-held territory. To Hitler and the German High Command, this salient represented both a danger and an opportunity. If the Red Army attacked first, German forces on either side of the bulge could be cut off. But if Germany struck first, the Soviet armies inside the salient could be encircled and destroyed. Thus was born Operation Citadel. The plan called for a classic double envelopment. In the north, German Ninth Army would attack southward from the Ural region. In the south, the 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf would attack northward from the Belgorod area. The two pincers would meet east of Kursk, trapping hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. Hitler placed his hopes in new wonder weapons. The Tiger tank, with its thick armor and deadly 88mm gun, had already proven its power. The Panther, a fast and heavily armed medium tank, was intended to dominate the battlefield. The massive Ferdinand tank destroyer carried an even more powerful gun capable of destroying any Soviet tank at extreme range. For the first time since 1941, Germany concentrated its armored strength for a single massive offensive. But the Red Army was ready. Unlike in the early years of the war, Soviet intelligence had penetrated German planning at the highest levels. Through radio intercepts, reconnaissance, partisan reports, and information from Allied sources, Moscow learned not only that an attack was coming, but where, when, and with what forces. Stalin, once deeply suspicious of intelligence warnings, now trusted them. Instead of launching a premature attack, the Soviet High Command decided to absorb the German blow and then destroy the weakened enemy with massive counteroffensives. Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky designed a plan that would turn the Kursk salient into a gigantic trap. The Red Army transformed the bulge into the most heavily fortified region ever created. 8 defensive belts were constructed in depth. Thousands of kilometers of trenches crisscrossed the landscape. Anti-tank ditches cut deep scars into the soil. Entire forests were turned into concealed artillery parks. Villages became fortress strongpoints. More than 1 million mines were planted, anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines, booby traps. Every approach road was mined. Every likely tank route was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Behind these defenses stood enormous reserves, tank armies, mechanized corps, cavalry units, and fresh infantry formations. For months, Soviet soldiers worked day and night with shovels and pickaxes, turning farmland into a fortress. When German reconnaissance aircraft flew over the region, they saw endless trench lines and gun positions. They reported massive troop concentrations. Yet German command believed that Soviet morale was low after years of war, and that the Red Army would break under a concentrated armored assault. They were fatally mistaken. By July 1943, more than 4 million soldiers faced each other across the Kursk front. The Germans assembled nearly 900,000 men, 2,700 tanks and assault guns, and 2,000 aircraft. The Red Army deployed over 1.9 million soldiers, more than 5,000 tanks, and nearly 3,000 aircraft, with massive reserves positioned behind the front. Never before had such power been concentrated on a single battlefield. On the night of July 4th, German units moved into their attack positions. Engines rumbled quietly in forests and ravines. Infantry assembled behind tank formations. Engineers prepared to clear minefields. Artillery units calibrated their guns. The soldiers knew they were about to take part in something enormous. In the early hours of July 5th, Soviet artillery struck first. A massive preemptive barrage erupted along the entire front. Thousands of guns opened fire simultaneously. German assembly areas were smashed. Supply depots exploded. Communications were disrupted. Panzer units suffered losses before the attack even began. Then the German artillery replied. The horizon lit up with fire. The earth shook as shells slammed into Soviet defenses. Luftwaffe bombers roared overhead, dropping tons of explosives on trenches and strongpoints. The air filled with smoke, dust, and burning fuel. And then the panzers advanced. In the north, General Walter Model's 9th Army attacked toward Kursk through dense minefields and fortified positions. His divisions, including elite Panzer and Panzer Grenadier units, moved forward behind heavy Tigers and Ferdinands. Almost immediately, they ran into a nightmare. Mines detonated under tank tracks. Anti-tank guns opened fire from concealed positions. Soviet artillery pounded German columns. Infantry armed with grenades and explosives crawled toward immobilized vehicles. Every kilometer cost dozens of tanks. German engineers worked under fire to clear lanes through minefields, only to discover new mine belts beyond. Soviet defenses seemed endless. Every breakthrough led only to another line of trenches and guns. Progress slowed to a crawl. In the south, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein launched his assault with the most powerful armored force Germany had ever assembled. The 2 SS Panzer Corps led the attack, spearheaded by the Leibstandard, Das Reich, and Totenkopf divisions. Here, German commanders hoped to achieve a decisive breakthrough. For days, the SS divisions fought through Soviet defenses village by village. The fighting was brutal and relentless. Tanks burned in fields. Infantry battled hand-to-hand in trenches and cellars. Artillery pounded positions until nothing remained but shattered earth. The Soviet defense bent but did not break. Every time German units pierced a defensive line, fresh Soviet formations counterattacked. Reserves moved forward continuously. Air battles raged overhead as Soviet and German fighters and bombers clashed in the skies. The battlefield became an inferno. As the German advance slowed, Hitler grew impatient. He demanded faster progress. He demanded decisive results. But his generals could not conjure victory from a battlefield that had been prepared for their destruction. The Red Army was bleeding, but it was bleeding on its own terms. The German offensive pushed deeper into the salient, but at enormous cost. Tanks broke down. Fuel ran low. Crews were exhausted. Replacement vehicles arrived too slowly. The vaunted Panther tanks, rushed into service, suffered from mechanical failures and engine fires. Many never reached the battlefield. By July 10th, the German timetable was in ruins, and the decisive moment approached. By the second week of July 1943, the great battle for the Kursk salient had entered its most violent and decisive phase. The German armored spearheads had driven deep into the Soviet defensive belts, but the promised breakthrough remained elusive. Everywhere the Wehrmacht advanced, it found itself swallowed by layers of fortifications, minefields, artillery zones, and counterattacking Soviet reserves. The Red Army had not merely prepared for Citadel, it had engineered the battlefield itself. In the north, General Walter Model's 9th Army continued its grinding assault through the Ural sector. The terrain there favored the defender. Forests, swamps, and rolling hills restricted tank movement and forced German units onto predictable axes of advance. Soviet anti-tank guns waited along these routes, camouflaged with meticulous care. When German columns emerged from the trees, they were met by storms of armor-piercing fire. The massive Ferdinand tank destroyers, designed to dominate long-range combat, found themselves ill-suited for such terrain. Without machine guns, they were vulnerable to Soviet infantry. Sappers crept close under cover of smoke and dust, attaching magnetic mines to their hulls or dropping explosives beneath their tracks. Even the most powerful German vehicles could be reduced to burning wrecks in minutes. The battlefield soon became a maze of shattered steel. German artillery fired continuously, yet Soviet guns answered every barrage. Rocket launchers screamed across the sky, saturating German positions with fire. Luftwaffe pilots reported that the ground appeared to be boiling as explosions tore through trenches and forests. By July 9th, Model's divisions had advanced only a few kilometers at catastrophic cost. Entire regiments had been reduced to shadows of their former strength. Ammunition shortages became critical. Fuel convoys were destroyed by Soviet aircraft and partisans. Field hospitals overflowed with wounded. The northern pincer was failing. In the south, Manstein's forces achieved greater initial success. The 2 SS Panzer Corps punched through several Soviet defensive lines, driving toward the railway station at Prokhorovka, the last major obstacle before Kursk itself. The Leibstandard and Das Reich divisions advanced under constant artillery fire, losing dozens of tanks but pressing forward with ruthless determination. Soviet commanders recognized the danger. If the Germans reached Prokhorovka and broke through, the road to Kursk would lie open. Marshal Zhukov and General Rotmistrov made a fateful decision. The 5th Guards Tank Army, held in reserve behind the front, was ordered forward for a direct counterattack. Its mission was clear: stop the German advance at all costs. At dawn on July 12, 1943, the fields west of Prokhorovka erupted into one of the most violent clashes in military history. More than 800 Soviet tanks surged forward in dense formations. T-34s and light tanks raced across open ground toward the advancing German panzers. Dust clouds rose into the sky. Engines roared. Artillery thundered. The German Tigers and Panthers opened fire at long range, destroying Soviet tanks before they could close. But the Soviet commanders had anticipated this. They ordered their units to drive directly into the German formations, reducing the range to point-blank combat where the numerical superiority of the Red Army could overwhelm the heavier German armor. The battlefield collapsed into chaos. Tanks collided at full speed. Cannon fired at distances of less than 100 meters. Turrets were blown off hulls. Vehicles burned in towering columns of smoke. Crews bailed out under machine gun fire. Infantry fought among the wrecks. The noise was deafening. Survivors later said it was impossible to hear orders. They fought by instinct and memory. The air filled with burning fuel and cordite. The ground was littered with shattered tracks and twisted metal. Horses from nearby supply units ran through the battlefield in terror. By midday, the fields around Prokhorovka were covered with hundreds of destroyed vehicles. The Soviet losses were enormous. Entire brigades were wiped out. But the German advance was halted. The SS divisions could go no further. The road to Kursk was closed. That same day, the strategic situation changed forever. Hitler received news that Allied forces had landed in Sicily. A new front had opened in the Mediterranean. Germany could no longer afford to concentrate its strength in the east. On July 13th, Hitler summoned his commanders and ordered Operation Citadel halted. The greatest German offensive of the war was over. But for the Red Army, the battle was only beginning. Even as the German attack stalled, Soviet forces launched Operation Kutuzov against the Ural salient. Massive artillery barrages tore into German positions. Entire defensive sectors vanished under waves of fire. Tank armies surged forward, exploiting breaches before the Germans could react. Model's Ninth Army found itself under attack from multiple directions. German units that had spent days attacking were now forced into desperate defensive battles. Supply lines collapsed. Fuel ran out. Units became isolated. Entire divisions were encircled and destroyed. The retreat from Orel became a nightmare. In the south, the Red Army launched Operation Rumyantsev, striking toward Belgorod and Kharkov. German defenses, already weakened by Citadel, crumbled under the weight of the Soviet assault. The tempo of the advance shocked even Soviet commanders. Tank armies advanced dozens of kilometers in days. Air power dominated the skies. German columns were hunted relentlessly by Soviet aircraft. The Wehrmacht was driven back across a wide front. By early August, Belgorod and Orel were liberated. In Moscow, artillery fired a victory salute, the first of the war. Then came Kharkov. The city had changed hands 4 times since 1941. It was a vital industrial and transportation center, and its loss would mark the collapse of the German southern front. German defenders fought desperately. Street battles raged. Buildings were reduced to rubble. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. On August 23, 1943, Kharkov fell for the final time. The Battle of Kursk was over. Its consequences were monumental. For the first time since 1941, the Red Army had seized permanent strategic initiative. The Wehrmacht would never again launch a major offensive on the Eastern Front. From that moment onward, Germany would fight a defensive war it could not win. The German armored forces had been shattered. Thousands of tanks were destroyed. Thousands of experienced crews were dead or wounded. The industrial system could not replace the losses fast enough. The Red Army, by contrast, emerged stronger than ever. Soviet industry now operated at full capacity. Factories beyond the Urals produced tanks, aircraft, and guns in staggering numbers. Training improved. Commanders gained experience. Coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air power reached unprecedented levels. The doctrine of deep battle was now fully realized. From Kursk, the Red Army drove westward. In the autumn of 1943, it reached the Dnieper River. In 1944, it smashed Army Group Center in Operation Bagration. In 1945, it crossed the Oder and stormed Berlin. The men who raised the red flag over the Reichstag had fought at Kursk. The tank commanders who broke through at Minsk had survived Prokhorovka. The infantry who crossed the Oder had dug trenches in the Kursk fields. Kursk forged the army that would destroy the Third Reich. For the German soldiers who survived, Kursk was the battle that ended hope. Many wrote later that they knew the war was lost that summer. The enemy was too strong. The losses were too great. The future too dark. The Panzerwaffe, once the symbol of German power, would never recover. And so the Battle of Kursk entered history not merely as the largest tank battle ever fought, but as the moment when the fate of Nazi Germany was sealed. In the burning fields of Russia, the German war machine met an enemy it could no longer defeat. And history turned.